left for Cuba, and after, I've been getting a lot of questions about how I got there, what I was doing, and a lot of these questions are from mostly other Americans, actually. A lot of them, a lot of people just don't know how Americans can travel to Cuba, and there's a lot of confusion with ongoing political talks right now, and a lot of people don't necessarily understand like what all that means. And so I just wanted to address some of the questions that people have been asking me. And so I'll just start by saying, so I am a music student and French student at Michigan State University, and MSU is one of the institutions allowed by the government to travel to Cuba for academic purposes. So I was able to get a student visa um, to go study at the Colegio San Jerónimo, which is part of the University of Havana, and um, you can be on a student visa in Cuba for 4 weeks. So that was what I was doing. I was studying there and doing research for those 4 weeks. And my process to get a visa is actually quite easy, I guess, compared to other programs, other countries. Um, all I really had to do was just give my passport copy and some information for the flights to my professors, and they took care of all of it. So with Cuba opening up, as we hear a lot on the news, first of all, these conversations that politicians are having are really just talks as of right now. They're just, what happened was they said, okay, we're going to acknowledge each other's existences as countries, and we're going to agree to keep talking. So that was like the first round of talks. And the second was, okay, so we eventually want to change some things, but we're going to agree to set up another conversation. So that's what these rounds of talks that we're hearing about on the news are, is that nothing's actually changed yet. I think it's really important that people need to know this, is that Cuba has not officially opened up to the U.S. yet. And a big part of this is the U.S. embargo is still in place. And a lot of people don't realize what exactly that means. So after Fidel took over Cuba, the U.S. placed an embargo with banning any trade with Cuba, and also something that affected Cuba and hurt it a lot was that the U.S. set up sanctions where ships coming to if they wanted to go to Cuba, they couldn't come to the U.S. within 6 months. So that affected Cuba's trade a lot. And now all of this is still in place. It's still happening. The embargo is still in U.S. law. So when I got back, I met someone who asked me, like, I was wearing like a Havana Club t-shirt, and they're like, oh, like, can I just go there as a tourist for the weekend or something? And the answer is no, you cannot. The U.S., the steps that we're taking for Americans to be able to go is that the visas you have to qualify are still the same, but what the government has done is it's made it easier to qualify for one of those categories. So these categories are like the visa I was on, students, teachers can also go if you're doing something in association with a Cuban school or some kind of education program. If you're a journalist or a diplomat, you can get a visa. Or if you have a Cuban passport, So a lot of times, Cubans who were born in Cuba but came to the U.S. as kids, so they're American citizens, but they still have Cuban passports. They can go back. Um, or if you're actually, I don't know if that's 100% true. I just sat next to a lady on a plane from Havana to Miami, and I was talking to her about what she was doing there, and she said that she hadn't been back since she left after the revolution when she was a little girl. And I asked her. She was with her husband, who was an American citizen, and he had to have a visa, but she was like, "Oh yeah, I just have my Cuban passport. I can." She made it sound like she can go back whenever. So I don't know exactly about that part. However, Cuban Americans can qualify for visas to visit family. Um, and that works the other way around too. Cuban citizens can visit family in the U.S., travel to the U.S., and contrary to popular belief in the United States, is that Cubans can leave Cuba. Um, I was actually surprised to find this out because I was under the impression that no one was allowed to leave the country at all, but that's not true. Cuban citizens can leave Cuba to travel. They have been able to for a while. So, I want to talk a little bit more about travel to Cuba for Americans. So unless you're on one of these visa categories, the only other way for you to go to Cuba would be illegally. So what that would entail is you would need to go first to a country that has transportation between Cuba, which is pretty much everywhere else in the world except the United States. A lot of people that I've either heard about or that I met in Cuba, they go to Canada first, or Mexico, or the Cayman Islands. It's another popular one that I heard about. So people will go to one of these other countries and then buy their ticket there and then fly to Havana. So if you do that, you can't get your passport stamped in customs in Havana, because when you go to come back to the U.S. and they ask you, did you go anywhere else? Have you visited any other countries on this trip? And you say Cuba, I think you're going to face some fines, and you're probably in some trouble with the government, and that's, there's risk involved with that. Another thing is, if you go illegally, the government does not know you're there. The American government, that is. So that could be problematic if something happens to you. Cuba is very safe, but for me personally, I don't know if I want to take that risk. But also, there's no U.S. embassy there yet, so it's not like like when I was in France, it's not like I can just, if I have a problem or something, I can go to the U.S. consulate and be like, oh, I need help. Can you, if something happens to your passport, you don't get that kind of support that you do anywhere else. So, leave a comment below with questions you have about Cuba. If you're an American who's been to Cuba, if you want to let us know below how you did it, how you got there, what you were doing. Yeah, so let's continue the conversation about Cuba.